So a lot of people don't know this, but my mom actually went to a coding boot camp run by EDS. So tell me about that.
Well, EDS was a company started by Ross Perot. Ross Perot was an old IBM salesman, and he had made as much commission as he was allowed to make by February one year. And so he had to leave because he wasn't going to make any money.
Yeah.
So he leased time at night when the computer wasn't as busy.
Yeah.
And he would lease time, and then he would people would take their round reels, because that's all you had.
Yeah.
And they would put them in the trunk of their car, and they'd go to this bank or that insurance company, and they'd had so many hours, and they would run the jobs for this other customer.
Oh, okay.
It was just it was batch. It wasn't online. It was just batch. Batch processing at night.
Right,
and so that's how Ross Perot became Ross Perot.
Okay. And then so you went to
I applied for a job for tape librarian at EDS because the title was right. Because I'd just gotten out of school with my master's in library science. My dad was reading the Dallas Morning News, and he said, "Here's a job, tape librarian." So I applied, and they said, "Well, you're overqualified for tape librarian because tape librarian is just a very, very clerical job." But we have this new position that we're experimenting with called technical librarian. And what you do is you do a lot of the programmers will teach you what it is they want you to do.
Yeah.
And you're taking away the clerical work away from the programmers, so they can concentrate on more, higher level work. And they could write code maybe. And so that's what I did. And I had 8 programmers that's supposed to give me work. And I was in the front of a cube row, and my 8 programmers were behind me, and I was there, and the customers would call me. And the programmers were called systems engineers, or SEs, and they would tell me some problem. And I would say, "Well, I'll get an SE on that right away." And the programmers would say, "Please stop saying you'll do that." Anyway, they had little classes. Operators had an operational educational opportunity, and I guess it was such a new job that they hadn't formalized it or anything. So I just took any of the operational classes that I hadn't taken, and that were offered to me, and I learned things like JCL, and which is job control language, which is a batch function for running jobs on the computer.
Okay.
And we didn't have terminals on our desk. We didn't have computers on our desk because computers were in the basement.
Right.
And so they had banks of terminals that you would have to go, and those were called the tubes. And Ray would call me, "Where is Ann?" "Oh, she's down at the tube." So that's what, and then you might have to stand in line for a couple of minutes to get to a tube to run your jobs, to do what it is. I would copy a member of some JCL from one date. We had multiple data centers at EDS in San Francisco and California and Florida and Pennsylvania, and a couple of them in Dallas. We had other ones, but those are the ones I can remember. And so I had to copy these members from San Francisco to Dallas. And I had a little utility to send, "It's in this library," and I'll go put it in this library. And so I ran it, and the programmers, they just knew they could ask me to do it, and I would get it done. Those kind of things where you have jobs where you don't know how to do it, but you know the person who does.
Yeah, we call these extract, transform, and load scripts now.
Well, it was just copying a job. This was just copying JCL, a job in a library.
You were doing DevOps. That's what you were doing.
Okay. Anyway, and I was I was just copying the thing, and we didn't have individual libraries.
You were deploying scripts?
No, I was copying a job.
Okay.
And that's all I could tell you. And and we had libraries, but we had work libraries, and people didn't get their own libraries. You had to share the work library, and we called it Sys4 Work File or Work Live or something like that. And so every once in a while, a new person, mostly an SED, they were SED1, which was, just a lower than low, and then, you graduated to 2, and then you got to go to class. Anyway, somebody would accidentally delete the work file because it wasn't, I think this was before Rack F, which is security level.
Okay. Oh,
and
okay. Like user permissions.
Yeah,
and
user
stuff.
permissions. And
Okay.
Anyway, some newbie would have to, and their punishment was they had to go around and tell other people that I scratched the work library.
Oh, yes.
And they'd say, oh, okay, that's all right. I can just copy it from, San Francisco or whatever. You just copy it again.
Manual replication.
Yeah. So it was very, very, very primitive in many ways. And we used to, they had their own text editor and their own language, to do stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And if you came up and you got a JCL and you had to run it for one reason or another, you had to do a $1 run, the
dollar sign.
dollar sign, and run the member name.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I used to tease. It got so that Ray, I'd say, "Go $1 run the dishwasher," and he loved it. He would $1 run the dishwasher.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome.
And
so
it was very, very, very. It was mostly batch. It was
Yeah.
very little online. I did stumble
when
across.
you say batch, like just for people who are watching.
Well, when you pull up your laptop,
Well, we're online. We can just run any program.
Yeah, you can run anything. Well, you can kind of do that, but it's running while.
It's got a loop that's evaluated.
Yeah,
right?
the thing I don't like about the world, the current world, is you can't just go off and say run, and then you can go and you can bring up your next thing you want to do and run. You don't have to wait for the damn thing to finish. I don't like this having. Oh well, you can just wait for it to run. Well, why should I? I got other things to do.
yeah, you got to manage the difference
You gotta manage
between
it,
your UI
yes.
thread and your worker thread. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Exactly.
Kids today don't know how to manage their threads.
Yeah. Anyway.
So batch is when you run stuff like you schedule a big long task to run on
You
some
can.
system somewhere.
Sometimes you do it yourself individually
Yeah.
as a developer,
Right.
as a programmer.
Right.
You're doing those individual things because you're developing that process.
Sometimes you're running a data transform
and
script.
yes,
like
and they
one
had
time locally.
yes, and they had jobs that ran. We did processing for Medicare for states, and so we had Iowa and Indiana and Florida, and I can't remember the other ones. Anyway, and they would run at night, and their jobs, the first 3 letters kind of told you what it was doing, what those group of jobs were doing. And they would call me and say, Hector Baker Alpha Charlie 1935 went down with a Sock 7. And so oh, okay.
So that was
it's a
your
job.
exit code. So you
That was
get
the
a
job that
phone
went down
call. You would
at
get a
night.
phone call at night
Night.
about your exit code on your job.
And
That
it would break, and they'd want you to fix it.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So tell me again about your boot camp experience.
Yeah,
Like, when you went through that.
I was working for I was the librarian, and the programmers would give me things to do, and programmers knew everything. I didn't realize they didn't know much more than I did. So I got talked into going to SED school.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing is you spend a year at a customer site, or I was at the data centers.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of my level. And I knew one thing that the other SED students, I knew JCL. I knew the job language.
Mm-hmm.
And some utilities. So we go in, and everything was so organized. You had a book. These were self-publicized books that they made in EDS. So every day you had so many pages. Week 1, day 1.
Yeah.
Week 1, day 2.
Yeah.
So you knew exactly where you were because they covered that day's worth of information.
Mm-hmm.
And they even had lists. Don't go to the doctor. Go to these. Here's a list of doctors in town, because a lot of people from all over the country would come into Dallas to go through SED school.
Oh, okay.
And so I was an
They
SED.
didn't want you to miss a day, right?
No, they
yeah,
did not want you to miss.
tight, yeah.
Yeah, and it was like 9 weeks, of a class, and you worked from 8 o'clock in the morning until midnight every night.
Yeah.
And then you got, in the middle of it, we got what essentially was a drunken weekend, because we all we had a break. We had nothing.
You gotta have a break.
Yeah, you had a break, and
and
you get to know people, and you get to know people. You know, in those classes. You know, I remember I was sitting at a company called what the hell was it called? Life Investors, and I heard they were talking to somebody, and he was showing them around in the data center. And his name was John Zambrisky. I said, well, I remember John Zambrisky. I went to SED school with you.
Oh, yeah.
He said, oh, yeah. So it was funny. I didn't meet many people, but when you did, you really, you knew each other. You know, do you know this guy? No. Yeah, I know that guy. You might not. Anyway, it's, you know, that's how it is in business. You know.
Boot camps. Like,
and
I
in
know,
boot camps, because you have an intense relationship with these people that may or may not last. And so then I went to work. I was a SED 3, you know, still a trainee, not a SE. I was an SED 3 or an SE. I was not an SE. I was an SED 3, and that's where you get. Hopefully, you get a mentor. Well, nothing that defined. You have an older program who's been there, and they were supposed to help you. Well, what did I get? I got an old guy who had a heart attack.
Oh no.
So, and he didn't come to work, and so I didn't have somebody to help me.
Oh no.
But I had done so much of that work before.
Was he okay?
Well, he lived, but he didn't die. He did live, but I didn't have a helper.
I didn't have a pair programmer.
I didn't have a helper.
Oh, no.
I didn't have somebody.
Oh, you didn't have a mentor.
I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have somebody to show me how to do it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, to write 10 lines of code was a big change.
Yeah, that is a big change.
Yeah.
Especially back then, you can't run it.
Right. And because you had to go down to the tubes and key.
Yeah.
You know, at least you didn't have to write at SED school yet. We had to write it on coding pads, and they were key punched by a group of people that did that, and you had to mark. This was always interesting. This was always opposite of what everybody else learned. We learned to slash our O's and you know, just write a 0 with any slashes.
Yeah.
So everybody else slashes their zeros.
Yeah.
But I learned to slash my O's because you do less O's and more zeros.
Oh.
And so then you had to work through the keying errors and, you know, through your program, and you had to get it to compile so that you could run it. And they gave you the data, and you ran it.
So you could
see what the results were. And then there was one and so we had to run 4 COBOL programs, one of them a master file update, which was, you know, very complex for a brand new person. And then we went into assembler, you know, or ALC. I don't know what you guys call it, but as ALC programmers, we call it God's code, because that's how God wrote the world in assembler. Because you do it all yourself. You are you are God.
Yeah.
As an assembler programmer, you have to build the world. I mean, you use you get to use their macros and all that kind of good stuff, but you are building. You are making the gun. You know, getting the gunpowder, and, you know, making the bullet, and, you know, you have to make the whole thing to shoot. Is what I've read, and I was better at assembler. I don't know why. Maybe it was click because I had I had that previous class, and so then we learned. Then we had to pretend. Then we had to play pretend world, and so you were an SE, and you had a customer, and the customer was usually your teacher, and they wanted you to make a change, so you had to help. You know, you had to figure out how to analyze what to do with the change, and write it down, and then. You know, sometimes, and some of those assignments in the class, one of them didn't work. One of them would get an abnormal end, or what we call an ab end. But and somebody had talked to another student in another class who was like, you know, a week ahead of us. Oh, it's supposed to do this. Oh, okay, thank God. So, oh my God, what are we going to do with this ab end? And and so there, so there you go. So that's what I did for a year, and I was because I didn't have my helper, my guide.
Yeah, your mentor.
My mentor. I was not very successful, but I finally made SE.
Well, it seems like you were successful. You were a programmer for 30 years.
Well, I felt like I wasn't at that time. I felt like I was just a big failure, and I left. And Ray had got a job in Hearst, in Hearst right here. So we decided to move, and I had headhunters. In those days, if you took a week's vacation, you were looking for a job. That's what people did.
Yeah.
And because it was so easy and the demand was so high, it comes and goes. And so I looked for a job, and I had a lot of interviews, different places. One place I interviewed that you work for a week, but you don't get paid. You get paid for the second week. And I said, do you make up for that week at the end, if you leave or something? Nope, you just work. I said, I want to work here for free for a week.
Yeah.
That's just too much. Anyway, it was wild. It was a very wild town. Dallas-Fort Worth was a wild town at that time. Like all boom industries.
Yeah.
And to be from EDS did impress people who read my resume and wanted to talk to me.
Yeah.
And one person, I had a year's experience at EDS as a SE. And they said, well, because you come from EDS, I'm going to give you 2 years. I'm going to give you 2 years of experience instead of the one you really have, because you probably have seen a lot more. But we had to go to very technical, weird classes that, we had to figure, it was very, very technical. We had, our programs were loaded into 4K of memory, and they swapped out the 4K. It was virtual. It's called virtual operating system. Anyway, and so we had this class on how, if you had multiple programs all that worked together, we called them, I don't know what we called them. It was a big program, and so you would invoke these other programs. You have one that would a driver, and then it would invoke all these other programs that did things. And we had to have this class on how to arrange the deck, the programs that you're going to be called, to make so that they would be in the 4K space, and you wouldn't be wasting your time swapping out core that this program and that program. It's just incredible. But I did learn some very tricky things, and helped me debug things when I started having to read dumps.
That's great.
Yes, and it was a wild world, and
today we call this Kubernetes, and they kind of act like it's a brand new idea, but it's so old.
Yeah, I'm sure every industry has that kind of a world that's gone through, giant growth overnight.
Right.
Every profession or skill set has this. I'm sure even doctors.
They rebuild the whole thing. I think because a new cohort comes in.
Yes.
And they don't understand the lower level abstractions anymore.
Yes.
So then they want to rewrite them so that they understand
them.
Yes. So then they build new frameworks that mostly are the same, but use different words, and that's all that really ever changes.
Yes, and you can really tell some of the people that have come in from outside of the company that you work for. They come in, and the first thing they want to do is download it all to a spreadsheet. A spreadsheet guy. There's nothing wrong with a spreadsheet guy, but that's what they know.
Yeah.
They know.
To
make it a spreadsheet to do those things. You have a database, but they want to load the database into a spreadsheet. Because they want to go back, because they understand spreadsheets. They don't understand the database.
Right.
And that's perfectly normal, but it's hard to work that through everybody being at the same level. You don't understand that that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's all very, very, there's a lot of psychology involved in programming. And, and I used to tell my users, never, ever trust a programmer. Never trust one. Because they will test with 1, maybe 10 records, and then they'll call it, it's ready to go into QA, and they'll throw it in, and it may or may not work.
Yeah.
So you cannot trust a programmer because
You
unless
can't just leave it up to them with no feedback cycle.
Yes. Yes, and you tell them what you want, and you have to interview your user and find out what they want, and you cannot let the programmer leave until you see that light of understanding in their eyes of what it is you have in mind. Because if they just go, oh, I don't have any idea what I'm supposed to do.
Or if they go, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, they might do that, but never trust them. Never, ever trust a programmer because they only know what they know.
Yeah.
They don't know what you know.
Right, exactly.
And the biggest thing, I worked in an insurance company, and the users would build dream screens because we had systems the screens were already defined. When you type in this transaction, you're going to see this information. And they said, oh, I wish we could have a piece from this screen and this screen all on one screen. And they called it the dream screens, And they thought those
are called dashboards.
They thought it was a big deal to ask for this, but the sophistication of everybody in IT and the user community grew, as everything, and it was very, very primitive in 1978 when I joined EDS.
Wow.
And I did find a group of guys downstairs where we had 2 floors, and I couldn't get a seat at the tubes, so I took my stuff downstairs because I was working on something. Anyway, and there was all these guys, and they started talking to me a little bit, and they found, oh, you're a batch, you're COBOL batch, ooh, and these guys.
A reason to exclude.
Oh yeah, these guys were assembler programmers, and they were online.
Oh, assembler online. Well, that
automatically makes you, you've
cool.
got the Superman cape on. That's for sure.
Right.
Yes, and the hardest thing. What is the hardest thing we do in IT? I know, you know the answer to this, but what is the hardest thing we do in IT? To find out what the user wants.
Yes.
It's very hard. Now they call it the user experience and all these kinds of wonderful, but that's still the hardest thing we do in IT. We want to know what they want.
Yeah.
They don't know how to communicate that to you.
Right.
Because they don't know. It's like when you talk to a user and she wants a report. I said, well, what do you want on this report? Oh, well, God, name, plan code, premium, or whatever the money is. They don't know. They just they have no idea, and they really are annoyed with you for asking, well, what do you want on the report? You should know what I want on the report.
Yeah.
But you don't know. And one things I've learned before I really quit programming was a lot of the user groups, they load everything to spreadsheets. Their spreadsheets of their life. Well, you have to learn how to extract the data for them to make that so they can just load the spreadsheet.
Right.
And we didn't know things like don't put the header except at the very top of the file. We don't need a header at every lines. It's 66 lines. We don't need a break with new headers.
Yeah.
And you have to break. We had to break ourselves from doing that. In fact, I put in a job that did that, and then another programmer came after me and said, you did not have a break for headers.
Yeah.
And I put them in, and I've forgotten why I didn't, and then I got back. Well, I did it because it becomes a spreadsheet.
Yeah, exactly.
And they didn't know that. So communication is very, very hard, as always is. It's always the hardest thing to communicate what it is versus what they know.
Yeah.
And it's still hard. It's still hard.
Yes.
It's still very hard.
Yeah, exactly. And so realizing that takes a long time, that literally it's largely.
But if you're in the middle of the revolution, it's very hard to know where you are.
Yeah. So you struggled with imposter syndrome.
Oh, yeah. I knew that they were going to find out I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
And then what was I going to do? How was I going to support my family?
Right. And it's like real and existential.
And your stomach would, just not. And at night, you had to, your cycles, the batch processing ran at night because, you don't want to interrupt other processing during the day. And we could call, and you had to, when I very first, you had to go into the office. I had to drive to downtown Fort Worth and go into a 22 story building at night and go up to the computer room and fix things. And then I remember we had a 300 baud, and I could dial in, and the screen just painted, but it was in my nightgown. So I was happy, because I didn't have to get up and get dressed and go downtown Fort Worth.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know.
That must have been, we take for granted working from home.
Oh yeah, working from home.
Call in, remote in.
Oh yeah.
Nobody sharing.
Nobody wanted to trust people working from home. They're just gonna fuck around. It's like poor people. You don't give them money.
Yeah.
They'll just buy beer with it and drugs.
Yeah.
And what do poor people do with the money you give them? They pay the rent and buy groceries.
Yes.
And what do you do when you leave a programmer at home? You leave them alone, and by God, she works all day. She doesn't even take lunch breaks.
Yeah.
Because you're in the middle of something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just people. Yes, it's very. Revolutions are fun after you've just gone through one.
Yeah. Yes.
And then you can go to happy hour and talk to people
about the revolution.
About the revolution. Yeah, like you're in the middle of AI.
Yeah.
Revolution,
exactly.
and we're just getting. The first Bunker Hill is where we are there a little bit. We're not at Yorktown yet.
No. That was a great analogy. Yeah, exactly. And every day something new happens, and it's very scary.
It's very scary.
You're like, oh no, this will obviate all these people's jobs. And you realize, no, again, the hard part is understanding the process. And while AI can help you, it can't do the understanding for you.
Yes, it can't do the understanding.
Yeah, right. Your use of the tool is not the skill. It's your human driving it forward.
And giving people new tools. People are reluctant, don't want to use the new tools.
Right.
And my phrase I would tell them is, use the tools, Luke, instead of the force. Use the tools, Luke.
Yeah.
And just the tools are there to try to help you. It's not to take your job. And people are afraid of AI because GPT. Yeah, it's going to take over. You'll never have to write. Nobody will have
copyright ever again.
Journalists, aren't going to do anything. Everything will be written for us by this, this machine, which is just not true.
Yeah.
You still got to know what it is you're asking for. Right. So you got to put the parameters in to chat GTP to get what you want out.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And the tool is they know how to spell everything, and they can go look up in the internet real quick and find out what it is that would help make that text better. So it really is a wonderful tool. You have to learn to embrace tools.
Yeah.
And just realize, don't you remember when we learned this? Oh yeah. And the greatest ways to learn something new, and when I was a young programmer, is if we were in the middle of construction of the office, and so we were on tables and chairs.
Yeah.
And our terminal was on the thing, and so you sat next to another programmer. We didn't have our drawers. We weren't in a cube. We were right next to each other, and if we were all learning something, like a text editor, at the same time you'd go, "Hey, I figured out how to do this." And we would all teach each other. And I always thought that's one of the greatest ways to learn something, is teach each other.
Yes.
And it's and then a book. If you can, a book, and the course of the book is how to use the book.
Right.
Is the greatest courses.
Right.
So they teach you how to use the tools.
Yeah, exactly.
And you have to not be afraid of the tools, which is easier said than done.
Right.
But that's what you need to do.
Gold. Golden advice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. As from an old programmer. I am old. 1979 I started at EDS. So that's how old I am.
Wow. I mean, that's a lot of years of technology history that you've just personally witnessed.
Yes. And it was fascinating. and horrible to live through at the same time. And you guys are going through it again, and you'll go through the next one.
Yeah.
And the next one. And hopefully you'll have enough experience, you just realize this is just another tool.
Yeah.
You know, it that's all it is. It's just ones and zeros.
Yeah, not the base layer.
It doesn't know what it's writing. It just knows, I'll copy this little bit.
Yeah, it's just a predictor.
Yeah.
You know.
It's like, yeah.
It's autocomplete on steroids.
Yes, very much so. All right, so turn me off. So